Sometimes I wonder how casinos are even legal. Everyone knows the odds are rigged against the player, so it's no surprise so many people try to cheat. Today we're going to dive into some stories about the wildest, most brilliant, sometimes idiotic, and dare I say legendary casino and gambling cheaters. Back in the mechanical days, pokies were nicknamed one-arm bandits because of how quickly they stole your money. They're easy to play, don't require any skill, and are deathly addictive. Casinos in the United States make the majority of their gambling income from the pokies. And where I am, in Australia, pokies are a massive problem. We actually have the greatest gambling losses of any country in the world. That's also your Australian slang of the day, pokies, which can really mean any electronic gambling game machine, but typically refers to slot machines. Tommy Carmichel was such a prolific pokies cheater that he was pretty much single-handedly responsible for many of the advancements to gaming machine technology over the last few decades. Tommy had always been interested in technology and tinkering, and in the 70s, he started his own TV repair business in Tulsa, Oklahoma. One day, in 1980, his friend came into his shop and unloaded a slot machine out of his car, along with 2 pieces of metal wire he thought Tommy might be interested in. The wire was bent pieces of guitar string, known as a top-bottom joint, that could be inserted into a slot machine and essentially hotwire the machine into triggering a jackpot. Tommy tried out the top-bottom joint on a 5-cent machine and was amazed when the machine dispensed $35 in just a few seconds. Just like that, Tommy packed his things up and moved to Las Vegas. There were no security cameras back then, so Tommy was able to hit slot machines all over town, making $2,000 a day. He shut down his TV repair business and for the next few years made his living off stealing from slot machines. However, in July 1985, he got caught using the top-bottom joint on a slot machine in a Denny's restaurant. Police didn't buy his excuse that the device was for starting his car, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While behind bars, Tommy became friends with a fellow casino cheater, Michael Balsamo. They had plenty to discuss when it came to how to cheat at slots, and they agreed to link up after their release. Tommy got out on parole 2 years later, and Michael was released shortly after. Neither of them were allowed to be in Vegas, but both moved back anyway and immediately got to work, but found that the old mechanical machines they used to play had been largely replaced by new digital ones that used random number generator software. They scrounged up some money and bought one of these new slot machines so they could open it up and figure out how to thwart it. Tommy discovered that deep in the payout mechanism was a tiny switch that could be turned off and make the machine stop counting coins. After 6 months of tinkering, he came up with his latest cheating device. A thin strip of metal, slightly curved with a piano wire threaded through that could fit through a small gap in the bottom of the machine. Once it reached the little switch, Tommy would pull on the piano wire to bend the metal and flick the switch off. The coin counter would be disabled and the machine would then spit out coins until it was empty. Tommy called this new tool the slider or monkey paw. The slider was highly effective. Tommy made $1,000 an hour with it. Other cheaters began to use it too, but not for long. In 1989, casinos everywhere began to install security cameras. And then in 1990, slot machines replaced the coin counting mechanism with optic light sensors, rendering the slider useless. Undeterred, Tommy's latest creation, the light wand, bypassed the sensors. It was so simple. All it was a thin metal rod with a camera battery on one end and a tiny light bulb on the other. It could be inserted up through the coin chute, and the light would blind the sensor and trick it into thinking no coins were being dispensed. Once again, the machine would then just spit out coins endlessly. The light one cost about $2.50 to make, and Tommy would sell it to others for $10,000 to $12,000. Tommy, Michael Balsamo, and their small gang got rich playing slots every day all over the United States. Tommy bought 2 houses, invested in a pawn shop, treated himself to a Jaguar, and traveled interstate in his brand new motorhome. In 1995, he took 7 cruises to the Caribbean and scammed thousands every day on the ship casinos. He always had an accomplice or girlfriend standing close by to block surveillance cameras and keep a lookout. But on the 4th of October 1996, he didn't realize he was being watched in the Circus Hotel in Las Vegas. Security guards descended upon him. Tommy quickly yanked the light wand out, flung it across the casino floor, and legged it out of there. Security guards found the light wand, but authorities couldn't prove it was Tommy's, and so his cheating charges were dropped. Tommy had been on the radar of Nevada authorities for years now, but he would soon end up being monitored by the FBI thanks to his old buddy Michael Balsamo's carelessness. In 1998, Michael got caught red-handed using the light wand. He was arrested and his phone records were analyzed, leading authorities straight to Tommy Carmichel. Tommy's phone was tapped and he was recorded discussing plans for his latest invention, called the tongue, which could foil the latest advancement in slot machines, the use of tickets instead of cash. The tongue would enable its user to load up machines with thousands of dollars worth of credits that could then be cashed out. The plan was to make a few $1,000,000, then retire. Tommy had a few of his accomplices test out the device in small casinos, unaware that they were being watched and followed by the FBI. In 1999, Tommy was apprehended for the last time in Atlantic City. He pleaded guilty to running an illegal gambling enterprise and received a lighter sentence of 11 months prison in exchange for showing authorities exactly how his tools worked. It's unknown exactly how much money Tommy stole over his cheating career, but it is estimated to be over $5 million. In 2012, Tommy told the Cheating Vegas documentary series that he honestly didn't feel bad for stealing from casinos. Another pokies cheat who operated at the same time was Dennis Nikrasch from Chicago. Dennis was a highly skilled locksmith who had a side hustle of breaking into cars, jewelry stores, and other businesses for the Genovese crime family. After a 9-year prison stint, Dennis, now penniless, decided to start over in Las Vegas in 1970 and put his unique skills to use. Armed with his lockpicking tools, he was able to quickly and quietly break into slot machines and adjust the reels by hand to trigger a jackpot. Like his counterpart Tommy Carmichel, Dennis could adapt his methods when slot manufacturers upgraded their security features. He created new tools and used strong magnets to maneuver the internal mechanism to make the machine pay out. Between 1976 and 1983, Dennis stole approximately $10 million. He was caught and convicted in 1986 and spent the next 5 years in prison. By the time he got out, casino security and slot machine technology had changed dramatically. Surveillance cameras were now watching every inch of the casino floor, and the new pokies were all digital. Through the Genovese crime family, he was introduced to Eugene Bulgarino, an IT expert, and together they got their hands on a slot machine and figured out how to override its programming. They programmed their own microchip that could be placed on the circuit board of a slot machine to give them an instant jackpot. They hired a team of 10 people and orchestrated an elaborate scheme to avoid detection. Female accomplices would enter the casino first to act as lookouts. Then Dennis and a couple of friends would make their way to a slot machine. His buddies would stand in certain spots to block the view of security cameras. Dennis would break into the machine and install his microchip in a matter of seconds. Then exit the building. Another team member would then arrive and play the machine and claim the jackpot winnings. Dennis, as the mastermind, took 50 to 70% of the winnings, and the rest was split between the team. They tested the game plan a few times in small casinos. Then on the 4th of July 1997, they hit Harrah's and won $3.8 million. After that, Dennis grew bold and started targeting other big casinos. Before the end of the year, they performed 10 more major heists. The team had to be rotated out often, as he couldn't have the same people regularly collecting big prizes. This meant that as the scheme went on, more and more people knew about it. Soon, team members were also growing resentful about their cut of the winnings or being swapped out. In early 1998, Dennis was planning his final run, a single megabucks jackpot of $17 million. After that, he was going to move to France and retire. Little did he know that one of his disgruntled former accomplices had ratted him out to the police. The FBI was onto him, and a search warrant of his home produced all the evidence that was needed to put him behind bars. He was given a lighter sentence of 7.5 years in exchange for helping authorities catch other slot cheats, but most of his lockpicking secrets died with him in 2010. When slot machines evolved into being computerized, the Nevada Gaming Control Board needed IT specialists on their payroll. Ron Harris was one of the software engineers hired to take care of security concerns that had to do with the microchips inside slots, video poker, and other machines. His job was to bust hackers and cheaters, but in 1990, a case he was working on turned him against his employer. He had caught an altered line of code in video poker machines manufactured by the American Coin Company. He he discovered that the company had instructed one of their own computer programmers, Larry Volk, to rig the machine so it generated fewer royal flushes so the company, who got a share of its machine's takings, could increase their profits. Volk became extremely paranoid when the scandal broke, and in the middle of the investigation, his house was firebombed. 2 weeks later, he was shot dead in his driveway. The hired gunmen were connected to the American coin partners, yet no one from the company was ever implicated. A switch was flipped within Ron Harris, and now he wanted to use his skills to steal from casinos. During routine testing of slot machines, he was able to sneakily reprogram about a dozen machines to add credits when a specific sequence of coins was inserted. Gaming control board employees are prohibited from gambling in casinos, but Ron took the risk and sat down on one of the slot machines he had modified. He carefully inserted the coins in the pattern that he had programmed, and it worked. The machine recognized the pattern and instantly added 200 credits. Ron recruited his childhood friend Reed McNeil to play since he wasn't allowed to. He taught Reed the coin sequence, and over the next 3 years, they took about $50,000 from slot machines in Vegas, Lake Tahoe, and Reno. However, Ron knew this method wasn't bulletproof, as the altered code in the machines could easily be traced back to him if anyone took a close look. He set his sights on cheating the game of Keno, which worked like the lotto. Players would bet on the numbers they think would be drawn on the Keno screen. As a gaming control board IT specialist, Ron was able to access the Keno software. He studied the random number generator code very closely and unraveled the complicated maths that went into how the numbers are chosen. He then created a program that could predict what number would come up next. In January 1995, Ron and Reed headed to Atlantic City to try and win a $100,000 Keno jackpot. They chose a casino that let guests play Keno on their hotel room TV. Reed checked in using a fake ID and took to the casino floor, while Ron hid in the hotel room. The two friends communicated via radio, with Reed wearing a small earpiece disguised as a hearing aid. Ron watched the Keno game on the TV and input the numbers into his computer program, which would then predict the next numbers in just a few seconds. Ron would then relay the numbers to Reed via radio. At first, the program's accuracy was bad, but just a few games later, jackpot. Casino staff had never seen anyone win the Keno jackpot before and were immediately suspicious of Reed, who was visibly nervous. He let slip that it was his first time playing Keno and accidentally handed over his real ID. It was all downhill from there. Security figured out that a Nevada gaming control agent was staying in Reed's room. And even worse, that agent had recently accessed the Keno software. Reed was arrested in Atlantic City and Ron was taken into custody as soon as his flight landed back in Vegas. Thousands of slot machines that Ron had worked on had to be checked, and sure enough, a dozen or so modified machines were discovered. In 1998, Ron Harris was banned from ever entering a casino in Nevada or New Jersey and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Reed McNeil was also convicted but did not have to serve any prison time. Lis Colavecchio had two nicknames, the Coin and the Counterfeit King. He had devoted his life to the craft of jewelry making, but in 1993, at the age of 51, he decided to retire. He soon got bored and restless in his hometown of Providence, Rhode Island. His mates decided to take him on a trip to the new Foxwoods Resort Casino in Connecticut to cheer him up. Lis wasn't a gambler, so his friends gave him some tokens for the slot machines. He didn't find much of a thrill playing the slots, but he did become interested in the $10 tokens. In fact, he became obsessed with them. More specifically, obsessed with the challenge of trying to recreate them. Lis spent $50,000 of his retirement savings on a hydraulic press and other equipment to make his own tokens. He knew that the slot machines had sensors and other counterfeit detection measures, so it was crucial that his forgeries were perfect. In February 1994, he believed he had done it and drove to Foxwoods to try out his freshly minted token. He inserted it into the coin slot, but it was immediately rejected. He went home to study why it didn't work and realized that the fake token and real token sounded slightly different when they clattered on the hard surface of his table. He wanted to take the real token to a professional metallurgy lab to determine the composition of the metal alloy, so he shaved it down into a blank square so no one would know what he was up to. Now that he had the exact breakdown of the metal mix, he was back in business. He quickly found a metal supplier and started making more tokens. He tested them out at Foxwoods, and this time, the machine accepted his forged tokens, and the casino cashed them, no questions asked. Lewis ramped up production of his tokens, but knew he couldn't steal millions from a single casino, so he spread out to Atlantic City in New Jersey. Over the next 18 months, he researched, tested, and produced tokens of all different denominations from 12 casinos. $100,000 of his own savings later, he was ready to wreak havoc in Atlantic City. By September 1996, he and his girlfriend were making $25,000 a night with the counterfeit tokens. They limited themselves to only taking a couple of $100,000 from each casino to avoid attracting too much attention. Atlantic City casinos were beginning to notice they had a significant surplus of tokens and began to suspect there was a counterfeit ring operating in the city. Lewis was eventually caught when he was spotted on a security camera abandoning 3 tokens that got jammed in a slot machine, which is highly unusual for most gamblers to do. He was sentenced to 27 months in federal prison. Later on in his life, he also copped convictions for stealing money from his 92-year-old aunt, resisting arrest, growing marijuana, and counterfeiting $100 bills. In his 2015 memoir, he claimed that the United States Mint asked him for details about his coin press equipment as it was of superior quality to theirs. Modern pokies are all tokenless these days, but the use of casino chips in table games like poker, blackjack, and roulette are still the norm. Since they can be cashed in for real money, they get counterfeited quite often all around the world. They aren't just a simple plastic disc though. They're actually made of a mix of high-quality clay and metals and have many hidden security features. In 2004, cash-strapped construction workers Erick Morikawa and Jeremy Lewis were inspired to make fake chips after driving past a casino billboard just outside of Vegas. They made a detour to the Green Valley Ranch Casino and bought some chips, then took them back to Erick's house. They cut into the chips to examine what they were made out of, but quickly realized it would be way too difficult to try and recreate them from scratch. Instead, they attempted to convert small denomination chips into large ones. First, they boiled $1 chips to cleanly remove the paper inlay. They bought acrylic paints, mixed up the perfect color match, then airbrushed the chips to look like $100 chips. They scanned the $100 inlay design, then printed out multiple copies on sticker paper, then simply stuck the $100 stickers onto the chips. They even bought UV light activated invisible ink and hand drew a small top hat design that the authentic chips had as a security measure. Erick was far too nervous to try out the counterfeit chips, so Jeremy took the 3 fake $100 chips and strode into the Green Valley Ranch Casino. A few minutes later, he walked out with $300 in cash. Now that they knew their chips would be accepted, they ramped up production and also began making chips of large denominations. They would buy real chips and play them to avoid suspicion, then cash the fake ones at the cashier counter. Erick and Jeremy made a pact to never tell anyone about what they were doing. Erick never told his wife where his sudden wealth came from, but Jeremy got into drugs and partying and accidentally blabbed about the scheme to a hired female companion. She blackmailed them for hush money for a few months, but eventually reported them. The Nevada Gaming Control Board obtained a search warrant for Erick's home and found the fake chip production set up in his garage. Erick was arrested and held in a high security facility on a $5 million bail. His large bail amount caught the attention of Russian mobsters who wanted Erick to teach them how to make counterfeit chips. Erick's bail was appealed down to $12,000 and he was able to get out and start working with the Russian mobsters. He received 25% of their takings, but eventually the fake chips were discovered and Erick was arrested again. He pleaded guilty and got 5 years probation and community service, as well as a $36,000 restitution, although Erick believes that the true amount he swindled was closer to $1 million. Then there was Christian Lusardi, who just ordered hundreds of chips online and printed out his own Borgata Hotel Casino stickers. He took his counterfeit chips to Borgata's Winter Poker Open, which began on the 14th of January 2014. Christian wasn't a well-known poker player by any means, and he would be just one of 4,000 players vying for a share of the $2 million prize pool. But by day 2 of the tournament, Christian was the chip leader by a significant margin. His glory was very short-lived though. First, the tournament organizer realized that the chip count was too high and the casino security soon got involved. Then, guests at the nearby Harrah's Resort, where Christian was staying, began reporting leaks in their bathrooms. Hotel staff discovered that the leaks were coming from a huge clog in a toilet. Someone had tried to flush hundreds of Borgata casino chips down the loop. 494 $5,000 chips, and 9 $25,000 chips to be exact. The poker tournament was cancelled, and an audit of all the chips found that 160 counterfeit $5,000 chips were in circulation. 22 more chips were found clogged in a men's room toilet in the Borgata casino. The total face value of the counterfeit chips recovered was over $3.6 million. Christian Lusardi was arrested a few days later and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was ordered to pay nearly $500,000 in restitution to the Borgata, plus an additional $9,500 to Harrah's for the damage he did to their plumbing. In 2011, 65-year-old Stefano Ampolini ordered a pair of contact lenses online for €2,000. These were not ordinary contacts. They were infrared lenses that would allow him to see invisible luminous ink. He had colluded with 2 corrupt dealers at the Le Prince Casino in Cannes, France, who had marked the cards with invisible ink ahead of time. They even repackaged the cards with cellophane. Stefano was able to keep track of what the cards were throughout all his poker games, and won €70,000 on his first night. Unfortunately, he wasn't as slick as he thought he was, and casino security clocked him straight away because he was winning way too easily and folded twice when he had decent hands. Stefano was hit with a 2-year prison sentence and €100,000 fine. Professional poker player Mike Postle was a regular on the Stones Gambling Hall Texas Hold'em live streams based in Sacramento, California. He wasn't a big star or anything, and the live streams only attracted a few hundred viewers every night. But in July 2018, he began a winning streak so hot that poker fans were calling him God. He was on a whole other level to his opponents. He seemed to always know the perfect moments to call or raise or fold, and often made unusual choices that would then work out in his favor.
Mike found a way.
Just call him, can we change his name to Jesus?
His style was very brazen and unorthodox. He opted to stay in games more than his opponents and was a very strong bluffer. In just over a year, he won around $250,000. Fellow pro player and Stones livestream commentator Veronica Brill was suspicious. She was an analytics developer by day and self-professed data and game theory geek. She had played against Mike in the past and had commentated dozens of his games, and she didn't think Mike's tactics and win streak made mathematical sense. He was just too flawless. Veronica and Mike were also friends. They had played against each other in the past and also hung out socially, but she couldn't ignore her hunch. So in March 2019, she shared her concerns with the tournament director, Justin Curatis. The tables that casinos use for live streams are embedded with RFID readers that scan players' cards which contain RFID tags, so that viewers watching at home can see what all the face-down cards are. The stream is then broadcast on a 30-minute delay to prevent viewers from helping players cheat. Veronica suspected that Mike had figured out a way to access the data from the RFID sensors somehow, maybe an inside job with a staff member working in the broadcast room. 2 other Stones players had expressed their concerns with the tournament director as well, but Justin Curatis insisted that the casino security measures were solid. During a live stream on the 21st of September 2019, Veronica could no longer bite her tongue. Mike had been dealt a Queen of Diamonds and Jack of Hearts, and the flop contained an 8 of Spades, 9 of Diamonds, and a Jack of Diamonds. He was in a good position as he only needed a 10 for a straight. The next community card was a useless 4 of Spades. His sole opponent, Vegas pro Marley Cordero, placed a $600 bet. Mike thought for a while, and to everyone's surprise, folded. Marley had a 10 of Diamonds and a Queen of Spades, the more valuable hand. Mike had once again made the right choice even though it was counterintuitive. Veronica knew something was off.
He's able to just lay down against the nut. Postle is just like a freak. He's just a freak of nature,
it's like
man.
He knows.
He's just a freak.
It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's weird.
Absolute insanity, guys.
She went on to analyze the fact that his VPIP rate was very high, but it didn't reflect in his post-flop play, meaning that for the amount of times he chose to play his hand, he just didn't lose enough. Just didn't seem possible statistically. A few days later, Veronica publicly accused Mike of cheating on Twitter and YouTube. The scandal spread through the poker community like wildfire. If you're looking for an internet rabbit hole to get lost down, this one goes deep. To summarize, videos of Mike's games were heavily scrutinized, his every little move dissected. Spreadsheets and scatterplot graphs were generated to show how atypical Mike's win rate was, and theories about how exactly he had cheated ran rampant. Players weren't technically allowed to have their phones with them, but it wasn't a strictly enforced rule, and Mike was seen looking down at his phone in his lap multiple times. Was someone texting him what moves to make? Mike also always wore a hat during poker. Could he be hiding some kind of receiver under his hat? Then there was the fact that he never really played poker outside of the Stones live streams. If he was such a poker genius, why wasn't he hitting the high stakes tables in Vegas and making millions? Stone's Gambling Hall conducted an internal investigation but found no evidence of Mike Postle cheating. On the 8th of October, Veronica Brill, along with 87 other poker players, sued Stones for $30 million, claiming fraud and negligence by the casino, Mike Postle, and the tournament director Justin Caradas. In June 2020, the lawsuit was dismissed under California law that states losses associated through gambling cannot be recovered in court. Shortly after, Mike filed a defamation suit for $330 million against Veronica, ESPN, and a handful of other poker pros for baselessly accusing him of cheating. Mike's own lawyers abandoned him, and he eventually requested for the suit to be dismissed himself. In June 2021, Veronica Brill won an anti-slap judgment against Mike and was awarded $28,000. The Serious Poker Network comprised two online casinos, Ultimate Bet and Absolute Poker. Both were licensed by the Carmichel Gaming Commission, which is based in Canada. It's the early 2000s, and regulation of online gambling was loose to non-existent. Both sites ran TV ads and boasted poker stars Phil Hellmuth and Annie Duke as ambassadors. Plus, Russ Hamilton, the winner of the 1994 World Series of Poker, was a consultant on Ultimate. In September 2007, players on Absolute began to take to poker forums to discuss the possibility of cheaters on the website. Reports of suspicious behavior, including unbelievably high win rates and flawless gameplay, flooded the forums. It seemed as though a small number of players could somehow see their opponent's cards. It was theorized that they had access to special accounts that had what was called God mode. Most of the suspicion focused on an account named Potripper, which won a $100,000 tournament despite only having previously entered 3 low-stakes tournaments on the site. A user named Crazy Marco was suspicious of Potripper's plays and requested his hand histories from the final game. Absolute granted the request, but accidentally sent him a master spreadsheet of actions at all tables from the first 2 hours of the tournament. The file also contained all players' hole cards, as well as their account email addresses and IP addresses. Crazy Marco circulated this document on the forums. Potripper's perfect success rate was clear evidence that they had access to information about other players' cards. They also had an observer who followed them from table to table. Potripper's email and IP were eventually traced to Absolute's corporate offices in Costa Rica and was widely believed to belong to the site's Director of Operations, AJ Green. His observer was theorized to be former CEO Scott Tom. Absolute Poker initially denied that any cheating was going on, but then later confirmed that there had been a security breach and blamed it on a staff member who went rogue. An internal audit revealed that there were 7 separate accounts that had cheated in a 40-day period beginning in August 2007. The Gaming Commission's investigation found that Absolute attempted to cover up the cheating by deleting game logs and records. The website was fined $500,000, placed on a 2-year period of increased supervision, and had to refund $1.6 million to affected players. In January 2008, players on Ultimate Bet began to report similar instances of cheating. A player named Neo was singled out as potentially having access to God mode due to their statistically improbable success rates. Like its sister site, Ultimate admitted that there had been fraudulent activity and scapegoated rogue staff members who manipulated the software before the site's new owner, Tokwiro, took over in 2006. In September 2009, the Carmichel Gaming Commission released its investigation findings. 23 accounts, including Neo using 117 different usernames, were discovered cheating, with the majority of devices and IP addresses connected to Russ Hamilton, Ultimate Bet's celebrity consultant. The commission ordered the website to reimburse $22 million to affected players and also slapped them with a $1.6 million fine. The scandal fizzled out. Then in 2011, the US Department of Justice charged the founders and executives of several offshore poker websites with bank fraud, money laundering, and violating the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act. Several sites, including Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet, were shut down. Some players never got their reimbursements. In May 2013, Travis Macker leaked an audio recording of a conversation between him, Russ Hamilton, and Ultimate Bet attorney Daniel Friedberg. Travis was Russ's assistant and was part of the cheating scheme, but wanted to salvage his reputation, so he secretly recorded the meeting. In the recording, they can be heard discussing the God Mode software they used to cheat, and Russ straight up admitted to stealing money.
And I did take this money, and I'm not trying to make it right, Dan, so we got to get that out of the way real quick, okay?
If the name Daniel Friedberg sounds familiar to you, he recently returned to news headlines when the FTX crypto fraud scandal broke. Daniel was FTX's lawyer and one of Sam Bankman-Fried's closest confidants. But that's a story for another day. In 1992, recruitment posters went up around the Massachusetts Institute of Technology campus, looking for students who wanted to make money playing blackjack. Back in 1962, an MIT mathematics professor named Edward Thorpe published a book called Beat the Dealer, which detailed how a player could win at blackjack using maths and explained how to count cards. In the 70s and 80s, MIT student J.P. Massar and his Harvard friend Bill Kaplan used these strategies and formed a blackjack team who would work together card counting in casinos. Card counting is a system that allows players to keep track of what cards are left in the dealer's deck. In blackjack, high cards are generally more desirable to the player, so if there are more high cards left in the deck, then the player has an advantage over the house. If a player knows that they have the edge, then they could place a large bet and walk away with big winnings. That was the basic blueprint of the original MIT blackjack team. However, card counting requires a great deal of practice and concentration, and by 1990, most team members were burnt out or just wanted to move on. But JP and Bill weren't done. They felt they had barely tapped into the potential for money-making, and in 1992 launched a recruitment campaign at MIT for a brand new team of card counters. Students were drawn to the opportunity because they wanted to experience the Vegas high roller lifestyle, or because they had a rebellious streak. There was little risk, as card counting isn't actually illegal or even technically cheating. Plus, they wouldn't have to put up their own money. JP and Bill ran things like a real business with a formal management structure. They set up Strategic Investments LP and brought on partners who would inject millions of dollars for the students to play with, then take a majority cut of the winnings. Bill and JP put the recruits through a rigorous training process, teaching them card counting techniques and the team play strategy. Players would have different roles to avoid detection by casino security. One player, the spotter, would start at the table and only make small bets. Their job was to establish the count. If the cards were in the player's favor, they would subtly signal to a teammate nearby, the high roller, who would then join the table and place a large bet. For months, the 40 or so students trained drilling card counting techniques until it all became second nature. They also practiced with loud music playing and with their teammates distracting them to simulate the intense environment of a real casino. By September 1992, the rebooted MIT blackjack team was ready to take Vegas. The painstaking practice sessions paid off. They were winning six figures every night. They began traveling to Vegas nearly every weekend. They'd play for 48 hours straight, then let loose and party on Sunday night, before returning to MIT on Monday morning to hand over the cash they won to a team manager. They would then go about the rest of their week like an ordinary uni student. The business management side of things was strict. Players had to keep a precise log of their playing hours, expenses, and wins. Players received a 10% cut of winnings. Those who performed well could score bonuses. By August 1993, the team was a well-oiled machine. They traveled all around the United States as well as to Europe and the Caribbean, and were careful to never stay in one casino for too long. They got to live the high life in comped hotel suites and were given free food, alcohol, car rides, and front row tickets to shows. The casinos were beginning to catch on. Griffin Investigations, a private investigation firm that specialized in the gambling industry, were following some of the MIT players around and eventually connected the dots and worked out they were an organized group. By late 1993, their photos were in every casino security room around the world. The students tried to outsmart the casinos by wearing disguises, but it didn't really work and they were frequently kicked out. Infighting had also started to occur. Many players, who were now just as skilled as their mentors, felt they weren't being paid enough. Egos and tensions flared, people weren't getting along, and they had suffered a major losing streak. JP Massar and Bill Kaplan had had enough, and they shut down strategic investments at the end of 1993. Many of the players split off into one of two student-led teams and recruited fresh faces. Like strategic investments, these new teams were also structured and operated like a real business. But the players invested their own money, so there was more of an incentive to perform well. By the late 90s, both teams had dissolved. Blood is thicker than water, right? Well, the Tran Organization was one of the most formidable criminal enterprises of the 2000s and was made up of mostly family members. The ringleaders were a married couple, Phong Quoc Trong, nicknamed Pai Gao John, and his wife Phan Tu Tran. They both worked as dealers at the Sichuan Casino in San Diego. In July 2002, John was caught on a security camera performing a false shuffle at a mini baccarat table and was immediately fired. Shortly after, Phan Tu was caught doing the same thing and was also fired. It didn't matter though, they were cooking up an elaborate cheating scheme and were learning from their mistakes. They were figuring out precise hand placements that would block the camera and were reviewing the best methods for their team play strategy. Phan Tu's brother, Tai Kim, had also worked at the Sichuan Casino as a manager, so he had intimate knowledge of casino protocols. Together they conspired to recruit other dealers to form a ring to cheat at mini baccarat all over the country. Mini baccarat became the Tran Organization's game of choice because players are allowed to openly track the cards with a pen and paper. Every round, 2 hands of 2 cards get dealt, the dealer's and the communal player's hand. Players around the table can bet on either hand. A third card is then dealt, and the hand with the combined value closest to 9 wins. Players don't bet against each other or the house, only the cards. At the end of the round, the cards get shuffled. That's when a Tran Org dealer would perform a false shuffle. It was a sleight of hand trick. About 40 cards, known as the slug, would be secretly held in the dealer's hand while the other cards got shuffled. The slug remained in the same order that was just played. Tran Org players planted at the table would have kept track of the order of the cards, so they would now know what the next card would be and therefore know exactly when to place large bets. Usually only one player actually needed to keep track of the cards and would then make a subtle hand signal to the rest of the table when it was time to bet big. About 15 of Phan Tu's family members became part of the ring. They traveled to casinos around California as well as interstate and even Canada. John and Tai Kim recruited dealers from casinos in other cities, usually other Vietnamese dealers, as they could connect over their shared language and culture. They also targeted dealers who had gambling problems and large debts. They would teach the dealers their perfected false shuffling technique and promised them large cash rewards for their participation. The Tran Org got away with stealing over $7 million in total from 27 casinos over 5 years. At one casino in Indiana, they won $870,000 in just 90 minutes. They were able to get away with it for so long because they never stayed in one area for too long. Plus, they had really honed their tactics with specially developed computer programs and hidden earpieces. John wasn't low-key about his newfound wealth. He bought 3 new cars, a Rolex watch, and a white gold pendant featuring a Mercedes-Benz logo encrusted with 105 diamonds. Eventually, California casinos caught onto the fact that there was a cheating ring operating, but they couldn't prove it. The Tran Org only came unstuck because they were expanding too much, and a couple of the dealers they tried to flip reported them. The FBI got involved and set up wiretaps, went through bank records, and were following and filming members of the organization. A few disgruntled dealers who had been underpaid by the organization became informants. In 2007, undercover agents posing as dealers set up a meeting with Pai Gao John in Biloxi, Mississippi, and covertly filmed the whole thing. On the tape, John can be heard bragging about the cheating and his luxurious lifestyle, incriminating himself. In 2007, Phong Quoc Trong, aka Pai Gao John, his wife Van Tu Tran, her brother Tai Kiem Tran, and 44 others were indicted for racketeering, theft, and money laundering. John pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years and 10 months in prison. He was ordered to forfeit his 2 houses in San Diego, 2 houses in Vietnam, his Porsche, Rolex, and other luxury possessions, and to pay $5.8 million in restitution to several casinos. Van Tu was sentenced to 3 years in prison plus restitution of $5.7 million. Tai Kiem was sentenced to 2 years and 5 months in prison and had over $800,000 worth of property, cars, and jewelry forfeited. Most of the rest of the organization pleaded guilty and received terms ranging from probation to 3.5 years in prison. Don't forget, I stream on Twitch almost daily. In fact, one of our viewers actually came to my Twitch and suggested this topic. Hopefully I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.